joining us at this live dialogue session titled Pan-Africanism, Regional Integration, Cohesion and Connectivity. I'm joined here by my fellow panelists, Miriam and Kwame. Thank you very much for joining us. We're going to essentially think about the ways in which the African continent is approaching what it regards as its multilateral approach. Over the last 2 to 3 years, essentially, we've had the coronavirus pandemic has forced the world at large, but more so African countries to think of collective ways of solving problems. Of course, we think about how the African Union, the regional economic bodies came together to not only to try to purchase vaccines and acquire other forms of PPEs and do contact tracing, but how to solve other governance-related problems in terms of their economies, in terms of political development. And that's essentially what I would like to get your perspectives on, as well as think of ways that those methods and approaches that have been tried in the past may have not succeeded as well in other areas, and how can we improve upon them. So I would like to start with you, Miriam, to get your perspective on, you can speak from any region of the continent you feel comfortable with, any issue, any theme. I'm more than happy for you to take the discussion in any direction you want to, as well as you, Kwame. I'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Christopher, and I'm happy to be here to be part of this dialogue. I would like to start from the perspective of the regional economic communities. We've talked about a pandemic that affected all of us, and we needed to deal with it collectively. Where did we start? For the last, let me talk of 20 years, when we come to regional economic blocks, we've talked about this spaghetti bowl of regional economic communities where you find we have common market for Eastern Africa, East African community, we have censored, we have ECAs, we have ECOWAS, there's IGAD. So there's a lot of intersectionality, so that we are in different economic blocks, trying to trade, trying to solve common problems, where pandemics is just one of them. I think COVID taught us a lot of lessons. But my question is, we are now talking about the African Continental Free Trade Area, where we are trying to bring all these countries together to trade as one Africa. My starting point is, should we have done this at the beginning? Because this is an agenda of the African Union, Agenda 2063. Should we have done it at the beginning? Start with the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Because what we have seen is we are going to face a lot of barriers. And the barriers are related to trade and even non-trade issues. So it will also limit the interaction, but creating that African economic continental free trade area is a good thing. How can we start off and make it better? I think this should have started from 20 years ago, not now. It's good it's already going on now. So that is the first point I would just like to put across. And I'm still going to give other points, but I think the main issue here is, as the African Continental Free Trade, we've signed agreements. How can we bring our development agenda to the fore as a common development goal with our differences within the regions? That would be a very good starting point. It requires a lot of commitment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kwame, I'm happy to hear your take.
All right, thanks. I think I agree with both of you that based on the COVID-19 pandemic, for the cynics, for people who are cynical about multilateralism and used to say that the idea of global common goods or global public goods was a misnomer, I think it reminded us very, very clearly that rethinking needs to be done. So there are few people left in the bastion of people who say that public goods cannot be created, and actually that they do not exist for common consumption. So management of the pandemic, of course, in terms of the investments that were made, the distribution of vaccines, and as we are here in Kigali, we all know that if there's a arise in a pandemic somewhere, everybody is at risk. So obviously putting our heads together and the question about some kind of global cooperation at regional and all scales is definitely on the fore again. So it's marching forward. If you come specifically to Africa, I think we have two necessities. One, there's the economic goods and questions of income, which the AfCFTA is trying to achieve. My view is that it's true, as Miriam has said, it's catching up on the regional economic partnerships, some of which have done, all of which have actually done very decent work. And my view is that we probably will have to build on the basis of the strengths of those regional groups, because unbundling them would actually be too costly. So regardless of what you think, ECOWAS, the SADC, the COMESA, the ESC, and all that are actually going to provide the raw material upon which AfCFTA is going to be built. So that's one. The second point that I come to is actually Africa is peculiar in terms of the public good that I call people's safety, which the security of people, of its people individually, is actually a problem in some areas more than others. And it has a cross-border component in the sense that being within, even within East Africa, if there's usually crisis in one country, it tends to flow into the other. I think that's one thing that also required cooperation. We perhaps haven't given as much attention to it. And my view is that pursuing an AfCFTA economic goods without thinking about people's safety is disjointed. And we have to actually start to put that together. I give credit to ECOWAS, there is, I mean, regardless of its, that, even the ESC, for which we've shown demand. So the ESC has expanded this year by Congo's accession, but it is also important because the ESC is not just an economic arrangement. There's also significant commitment to economic, political development and a democratic rule. So as we strengthen these systems, I think it's just reminded us that let's think of strong economies as underpinned by strong political systems. And I think the AfCFTA and the African continent in general can now speak about these things as if one is an alternative, or as if they're, I mean, we can speak about them with confidence that they're not substitutes, because the African game today shows. So if you look at the west of Africa, where safety is being kept by Russian mercenaries, that tells us that regardless of growth rates, I think there's a deficit in the provision of public or private security to people. And that's the role of governments. And because some of these actors who create insecurity actually operate across borders, so some cooperation in a coherent way is essential. So the AfCFTA has to come in here, but I think it also has to be underpinned by strong political systems. And I think that's the reality that's become more salient.
Thank you so much both for your offerings and contributions. I particularly pick up on the point you made about what you call the people's safety, because I think that's a very wonderful intersection between your point about the connectivities that should have been made 20 years ago and not beginning today, but then it also reflects other failings in terms of political systems and security systems. And I think, again, your example of West Africa is very vivid. You know, I live in West Africa, in Senegal. I'm from Nigeria. We see, as we talked about before we started this conversation, the many coups that we've had in the region. We've had 2 in Mali, 1 in Guinea, 1 in Burkina Faso, a failed attempt in Niger, what was essentially a failed coup in Guinea-Bissau. So the very obvious struggles between the economic realm and the security and political realm are very, very clear. So how do we, to pick on your point about making the connectivity, how do we make sure that we sort of get those nodes to respond to one another and to cooperate on the same wavelength? And I'll start with you, Miriam.
I think cooperation is very, very important here, because even as we talk about personal security, I will talk about security of belongings, because I focus a lot on trade issues. Personal security also involves security of your goods. And one thing we see across borders is a lot of theft. So we are talking trade issues, and Kwame, you're right. We are talking about trade issues. But where is the security component? So it means we need to just look at security in totality. Because as long as you're not secure as a person, even the trade will not achieve its goals. And for me, as someone who works a lot on trade issues, and I'm focusing on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which I've really done quite some work. I've seen there's a lot of negotiations and there are different phases going on. Perhaps this is time we look at the security aspect or cooperation in general with a strong security component. It is a very good starting point right now for the Continental Free Trade Area, that agreement, to start thinking of security protocols. How do we design agreements that can be implemented up to the national level in a way that works globally or regionally, but at the same time is so context-specific that when it is placed in West Africa and the countries that are really prone to, I don't want to call them coups, but issues of security, because you find it all boils down to inequality, it becomes a big problem. So we need to also design systems at this point, governance systems, that factor in security issues that can start at the regional level and be implemented at the national level. And when we are doing that, what is the financing component of that security component? I know in most African governments, when you look at the public finance systems, the security docket is never audited. In Kenya, a law, it was taken to court. That matter was taken to court and they said they need to audit it. I'm yet to look at what is being audited and not being audited. But in terms of security, it needs to be one of our key protocols, because you cannot talk about economics and leave security outside. Thank you.
Well, I mean, as we come towards the end, one of the things that I note is I think the African continent, a continent whose countries are young in a comparative sense, lost a big opportunity 4 months ago to more coherently speak about global insecurity, because it has had a backflow into it. So you find many African countries saying that there's a conflict in Ukraine, when we could be more unequivocal and say one country, which might have diplomatic relations with African countries, called Russia, invaded another country, generated a ripple effect that has had, especially for a country such as Kenya and the Eastern Africa seaboard, adverse consequences in terms of trade for food, in terms of security, and the possibility that arms will flow, and over time it'll. The AU country, of course, Kenya made, as a member of the Security Council, made a very concise and very, very clear stand on it. And obviously many countries on the African continent have walked back. We understand the geopolitical pressures, but my view is that African countries in general, which wants to have a clearer voice globally, I think needs to walk the talk and talk the talk and walk the talk. So we cannot be ambiguous when challenging US attacks on, or rather occupation of a country called Iraq or Afghanistan. But we now come here and allude to our old friendships with the USSR, which does not exist anymore, as the reason for giving Russia a pass. When we citizens of Africa see our countries speak from both sides of their mouths, we actually understand that we're in trouble, because they will also not tell the truth when it comes to domestic pressures. So I think the political hygiene that is required with the economic hygiene that is required is something we as Africans of all ages should be concerned, and I hope we can push forward with, because these are not necessarily, we don't say that they're easy things, but at least the truth is part of what our freedoms should be about. Thanks.
Thank you both so much. Thank you very much.
Just to add, I think collectively, please, even as we are talking about security, trade, as we are talking about cohesion and integration, I think why we are a bit quiet or talking from both sides of the mouth, you know, we've traded with Russia, African countries have traded with Russia more than they've traded amongst themselves. Yes. So that's a formidable trading partner. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. That's a good note to leave this conversation on for the time being, because it's an endless one. We will continue to talk about these issues for the rest of the 2 days and beyond that. I thank you both, Miriam and Kwame, for your very excellent thoughts and contributions and perspectives that you've brought to this dialogue. And I appreciate taking the time to share your views. And I look forward to participating in the rest of the dialogue session with you both. And we'll leave it here for now. Thank you.